Hello and welcome to another episode of Where on Earth Do You Live? This week we're in Sheffield, investigating the hidden stories locked away in the rocks under this fantastic city. First up, here are my top 3 facts about Sheffield. On the 30th of May 1963, Britain's first ever astronaut was born in Sheffield. Helen Sharman was the first ever British astronaut to venture into space, and indeed she was the first woman to actually go onto the Mir space station. Now, when I was doing my research on Sheffield, I couldn't help but think that Sheffield was a home to Sheffield steel, and actually geology plays a key part in this. During the 19th century, Sheffield gained an international reputation for becoming the innovation for steel production. It was in fact known as the Steel City. Some of these inventions included a crucible which was used for smelting iron ore and the invention of stainless steel. These inventions led to a huge surge in the Industrial Revolution in terms of productivity, which also led to a rise in population in the city itself. My final fact relates to football, and Sheffield is touted as the birthplace of football as we know it today. In 1857, Sheffield FC was founded, and it's said that the modern rules that govern Football Association games today was actually founded by this club. Being the birthplace of modern football, having the first astronaut into space, and being the home for Sheffield Steel are really quite extraordinary achievements for Sheffield. But that's not all the story. If we travel back in time 320 million years to the Carboniferous period, the city that we now know as Sheffield existed in a completely different landscape. Wow, welcome to Sheffield as it would have been 320 million years ago during the Carboniferous period. During this time, the landscape was dominated by these lush tropical jungles. They were hot and humid, and my goodness, it feels like that standing here right now. The landscape at that time was dominated by steep mountain chains and broad flat valleys which bridged the distance between. Those valleys in between those mountain chains were gently subsiding, and due to that, they were inundated with warm, shallow water, forming vast seas. Those mountain chains were subject to intense erosion, and rivers would carry those sediments all the way from the top of those mountains down to the broad flat valleys. The rivers flowing from the top of the mountains would be carrying lots of sediments, and when those rivers reached those warm shallow seas, they would lose all of their energy, dumping the sediment into vast deltaic systems. These deltas would contain sands which would have been washed down from those mountains, and over time these layers of sand would become buried, forming a sedimentary rock called the Millstone Grit. The Millstone Grit is the main rock that forms the Yorkshire Pennines. These deltaic systems supported vast swamps and lush tropical jungles which you can see behind me. Since there was so much oxygen in the atmosphere, the plants were able to flourish and grow to giant sizes. In the fossil record, we can see evidence of ferns and mosses and horsetails, and it is really quite extraordinary when you do look at the fossils to see the intricate nature of the vegetation preserved in the rock itself. The rivers flowing into the delta switch water between channels all the time. This meant that parts of the rainforest were actually inundated with water, which affected the health of the trees and the vegetation. The inundation of the water into these rainforests wasn't great for the vegetation. They couldn't survive in conditions like that, and eventually they would die and fall into the swamp. Over time, layers of decaying organic matter would actually build up into thick layers of peat. These thick layers of peat were buried deep under the earth. They were then subject to intense physical and chemical changes which forced the oxygen out of the layers, leaving behind carbon-rich deposits. These deposits form a black rock that we know today as coal. It was the rich coal seams that were discovered in the Sheffield area that contributed to the growth and the success of the Industrial Revolution. So if you're a resident of Sheffield or you're passing through, think back to what it would have been like 320 million years ago during the Carboniferous period. You would have been surrounded by these lush tropical jungles, and if you were in a car, you would have definitely had to put your AC on because my goodness, it was hot and humid back then. As Earth scientists, we are constantly looking for clues in the rocks and the fossil record to tell us about what the Earth was like hundreds of millions of years ago. Through doing this, we are able to help you understand where on Earth you live if you live in Sheffield.